Arts and Sciences at Tennessee State University. And of course, Dr. Lovett, before we had our first break, you were talking about African Americans in the colonial North America. And of course, let's continue that, and let's have you to give us some information in terms of the independence movement, and then move on into talking about the Constitution.
Well, African Americans were very important in the independence movement of the country. And the independence movement had a lot of impact upon the institution of slavery. By 1776, for example, the Quakers in Philadelphia are the first to declare that they are anti-slavery, and they formed the first anti-slavery society. What the revolutionary movement did was it made Americans think about the relationship of man to man, and about freedom, equality, and the fraternity of man, and liberty of man. And they could not ignore that almost a quarter of the country were enslaved, regardless of their color or their race. And so much of the anti-slavery movement started during the American Revolutionary Movement. 1780, Massachusetts, once it changes its constitution as a result of declaring independence from Britain, the first thing that it does was to outlaw slavery. And most of the northern states will do so by 1820 through gradual abolition acts. Acts that say, well, when the slave becomes 18, she must be freed. When the slave is 21, he must be freed. And gradually the North will get rid of slavery from that impetus from the American Revolution. The South will retain it, and so you can basically say the American Revolution was the beginning of the American Civil War, because ultimately we will have a nation that's half slave and half free. Most of the states will have gotten rid of slavery, and the South, of course, will have maintained that slavery. And the South will be able to do so because it will dominate the political life of the country, right, for the next 2 generations. There will be a Southern dynasty of presidents, slave owners, Washington and Jefferson, and then there will be Madison and Monroe, and then there will be Andrew Jackson and Tyler of Virginia, and Polk of Tennessee, and and so Southerners were pretty much dominated.
Just a whole range of presidents.
They were pretty much dominated because the South was the wealthiest region during colonial and New Nation period. They had the exports. They sold the cotton and the tobacco and the lumber abroad, and that brought cash and imports back into the country. So it was not the North that was the wealthy region, it was the South. And the South was the most populated region of the country at that time. But by 1860, it will be different. And immigrants will not come into the South, European immigrants, because they couldn't compete with free slave labor. So 75% of immigrants will come into the North. The North will grow by leaps and bounds. It will outdistance the South in industry and technology. By 1860, the North will own 90% of all the industry and the technology in the country, and the South will be generally, comparatively, a pretty backward region.